Well, folks, the Liberals may have shut down Parliament, but Canada's issues sure aren't on pause, and we're here to tell you all about them in this roundup of political news for January 24th through the 30th, 2025. Veteran strategist Sean Schnell and I press play and break down on the latest developments about how the CBC has a new boss, and she has some thoughts and interesting travel plans. What a new report on election interference means for the Liberal leadership race. Jagmeet Singh's impending flip-floppery. Pierre Poilievre's response to American tariffs and his thoughts on a certain type of deportation. A handsy Liberal minister. A new food insecurity emergency. And last but not least, how a new artificial intelligence project out of China raises some big questions. Folks, if you're enjoying this update, don't forget to select auto download wherever you get your podcast. Just click the toggle button to hit auto download, and you won't get any missed episodes of these updates through our Parliament. Sean, thanks for joining.
Thank you. It has been another busy week.
Yes, and I want to start with this report from the new boss of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So they have a new CEO that has just started, and I guess she did a pretty wide-ranging interview with the Canadian press this week. And I read through it, and I just was like, oh man, you have completely missed the point. So one of the big announceables in her interview was that she wanted to start a national tour to have a conversation about the Conservatives' plan to defund the CBC. But I think she's missed the point, Sean, and that is that the CBC has done a pretty good job defunding itself. And you and I have both watched communications change in our time in public service, and I know you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, I do, and I'm glad you bring this up. I actually think you wrote about this a number of months ago about the
2 years ago now, almost.
Yeah, it's been an ongoing conversation for a while about the CBC defunding itself, and you're absolutely right as far as missing the plot on this. I mean, everybody knows that communication has changed. This is not a secret. This is not a mystery to people. You and I have seen political communications change a lot over the last number of years. And here you have a government-funded agency that is continuing to ask for more taxpayer dollars, continuing to ask for support for the type of programming that they're launching while they're seeing viewership numbers decline, viewership numbers much lower than emerging and new digital platforms like social media, other digital media platforms. And it is just, it's a bit surprising that with all the resources that the CBC has, with all the employees that they have not managed to kind of put this conversation two and two together about how much communication has changed and how they should be adapting to the changes that people are asking for. This is what we're seeing in the marketplace as far as how people are consuming information, how they're talking to each other. And yeah, I think it was a little tone deaf, to say the least.
Absolutely. You know, the CBC, they keep coming to the taxpayer with their handout saying, give me more money. And they really haven't answered your question about value proposition outside of giving their executives large bonuses. So
Right.
You know, just as a parliamentarian, what I have seen is the CBC continue to decrease their viewership and relevancy while increase their executive bonuses. And that's a big problem for Canadian taxpayers. But to your point, they also haven't recognized that, as you said, how communication has changed in the last decade. I really see no evidence of that. You know, just look at me. I mean, when I started, and you remember this, when I started as an MP, we would literally spend 3 hours prepping to be on a CBC panel.
Yeah, at least.
Where the host would be confrontational and combative. There'd be 3 other members of parliament. it would just be like MP Fight Club, and I'd prep for 3 hours to maybe get a 10-second clip in and assume that they wouldn't clip me out of context.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe reach like 6,000 people. Insane. Like that would be my media prep for the day over a decade ago. Now, I mean, I hit a big milestone yesterday. For those of you who are listening to this on the Substack platform, you are one of over 95,000 people who received this newsletter. Thank you. In the last 30 days, the Substack platform alone that I communicate on has reached over 1 million views. And that's not including platforms that we communicate on. Some people, you'll be watching this on YouTube. You consume my content on Facebook, on X. And so that's just political communications, because I have had to adapt. We've had to adapt as a team to put out communications about my work where people are consuming information. Why does the CBC feel like they don't have to do the same? And they're not producing content that I think resonates with a lot of Canadians either.
Totally. Well, and the one thing I'll add about what you're talking about with this story with the CBC, this new executive is talking about a national conversation. This has been a national conversation for some time. One of your colleagues pointed out in that particular article that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have been having a national conversation about the future of the CBC for some time. And I agree with the executive. We ought to have a national conversation in the form of an election and let Canadians weigh in. There is no better national conversation to have than a national election. And so I think you're absolutely right around this disconnect that the executives and the higher ups in the CBC have had for years about where Canadians are at and just where the media landscape is currently at. So,
and I'll just jump in on that further. I think we both agree, and most Canadians agree, you need to have strong, independent, investigative journalists in a democracy. You do. Right. It's part of holding the government to account. It's part of ensuring that tax dollars are spent wisely, that issues that need to be in the public conversation make it there. But the reality is the Liberals have stymied a lot of journalists who have attempted to navigate from a very old modality of business, which is print advertising. Mm-hmm. That's why you see so many mainstream newspapers. They haven't made that gap or that leap. That they haven't been able to adapt. But the Liberals have actually stymied independent journalists that have tried to move into a digital context, particularly on local news, by pushing through Bills C11 and C18, which resulted in news bans on platform generator or traffic generators like Meta, like Facebook, right? So not only have they continued to prop up through your tax dollars legacy media outlets like the CBC that haven't made that jump well, but they've also stymied new young journalists from getting into these niches. And I'll just end with this. Like, there's nothing in that interview about something that made a lot of news across the political spectrum. That was a while back. The CBC actually changed their journalistic standards and practices, kind of like their code of ethics for reporting, where they actually removed the term objectivity from a requirement in their journalistic standards and practices. So, if they're trying to justify that they're not objective, then like, what's the value proposition? If they're not objective, if Canadians aren't consuming their content, then wouldn't we be better off just axing C18, axing C11, and letting journalists who have adapted to a new form of communications do what they do? And so, yeah, to your point, this national conversation has been had, and it was crazy to read this interview, just so tone deaf. Yeah. So something that has not gotten a lot of attention in that particular news outlet, the CBC, is the impact of a big report that came out this week on the Liberal leadership race. So we were following the Foreign Interference Commission, chaired by Commissioner Justice Marie-Josée Hogue. So she released her report this week, and it found that there was no evidence that members of parliament acted as traitors, but it made several dozen recommendations on the integrity of elections, particularly when it comes to party leaderships. And I know you've had some concerns about the federal leadership party or the federal leadership election in the Liberal Party, because we're already well into this process and we don't know how they're verifying the identity of people that are going to essentially select the next prime minister.
Yeah, and I guess I'll say, to start with, there's concerns, and I think it's incumbent on the Liberal Party and the government to dissuade Canadians of any concerns, because again, they are choosing the next prime minister. And so this is not for just academic discussion or conceptual kind of thought. They have a responsibility to allay the concerns of Canadians in this, and they really haven't, because as we've now learned as to how this process is rolling out, people can register and sign up without paying any sort of money, without any sort of transaction, become a member of the Liberal Party, and it appears that they will be allowed to vote for whoever they want as the next leader and will be the next prime minister. But there is no information. They have not provided any sort of insight as to how they are going to verify people's eligibility in order to participate in this process. And that raises large concerns, as you mentioned, coming off the heels of this particular report that is talking about concerns and putting forward recommendations on how to prevent foreign interference. And here we are in the midst of a leadership race that in just a matter of a few weeks will choose the next leader of the Liberal Party and in turn the next prime minister. And like I said, the responsibility lies with the Liberals in order to say how they are ensuring the integrity of this process, because we're not picking class president here. We are picking the prime minister of our country. And so a little bit of information and insight into how they are ensuring that this vote is fair and that hasn't been impacted by outside actors or any sort of technological glitches or anything like this. Like we're left completely in the dark, and all we're left with is the assurances from a few Liberal higher ups saying, "Don't worry about it."
And it just boggles my mind that the Liberals have not come out yet and stated how they're verifying the identity of people who have signed up to vote for the next prime minister. They're already facing challenges explaining to people. I mean, obviously, I think this is wrong, but why a small group of Liberal insiders should be choosing the next prime minister instead of going to a general election. But just to reemphasize, for people who might not understand the process of how a political party selects its leader, what the Liberals are doing is they're saying anybody who signs up on an email form will ostensibly be allowed to vote to select the next prime minister as a Liberal member. But we don't know, the public does not know how they are verifying that person actually exists and are hopefully a Canadian citizen, permanent resident at the very least. We don't know how they're going to verify that somebody consented to be on that list. Mm-hmm. You know, if somebody has an email list, in theory, they could just plug that into the Liberal database, and then I don't know, if it's an electronic voting system, there could be fraud there, right? Somebody could be signed up to vote in this Liberal leadership and maybe not even know about it. So what I'm trying to say is the fact that we're now 2-3 weeks into this process, the vote is on March the 9th. We don't know how they're going to be voting. Is it going to be a paper ballot? Is it going to be electronic? What security measures are in there? And the fact that we don't even know how they're verifying identity in light of this report, it's brutal. Unbelievable. And the front runner, Sean, is an unelected man who has never held any sort of public office He's never knocked a door. And now this super sketch process that's opaque, at best and sketchy at worst, is likely going to, confer emperorhood on him.
Yeah.
That's where we're at with Canadian democracy. So, and Parliament's prorogued. It's great. But
crazy. It's crazy.
But I actually, I know you have a lot that you want to talk about the Liberal leadership race, including Mark Carney.
Yeah, well,
the front runner.
We talked a little bit about we talked a little bit about this last week. Let's start with Mark Carney. So we talked a little bit about this last week because you and your colleagues were pointing out quite right that Mr. Carney, Carbon Tax Carney, had been avoiding questions from the media, really not talking to Canadians through any sort of particular channel that would be normal for somebody seeking elected higher office like this. And so you were calling him out, and the media has really started to catch on to this as well too, which it's bad. It's bad when media outlets like the CBC are calling him out. And I've got a clip here.
Yeah, and I just want to describe this clip because so for those who are watching just on Spotify and not seeing the visual of this on YouTube, this is Mark Carney having not talked to media for the entirety of his leadership race to announce policy, coming out of a very swish cocktail party. And the media have found out where he is, and they're standing out in a scrum. And this is a CBC reporter, okay? The CBC is not known for their support of anything that criticizes the Liberal Party, and these are the questions he's being asked.
Mr. Carney, why haven't you announced the policy yet, Mr. Carney? Mr. Carney, why haven't you announced the policy yet?
I've got lots of policies. You'll see them.
Yeah, but why haven't you? You could be prime minister in the matter of weeks. Why wouldn't you tell the Canadian people what they're in for?
Canadians are going to know exactly what we intend to do by the end of the leadership, and we're going to roll it out, and they're going to be detailed. And that's the difference between sitting in a room, coming up with some slanders and slogans, and actually having detailed policy that can make a difference for Canadians.
Would you scrap the carbon tax? Yes or no? Yes or no?
You'll see by the end of the week.
Yes or no,
You'll see by the end of the week.
Not
for the week.
Who called you the PMO's choice for leadership? What's your response?
I seem to be the choice of many of the Liberal MPs.
Oh man, brutal.
What?
It's the entitlement, right? That's what gets me. Why would I tell you peasants what to do? Like, it's just wild. Where to start?
Again, like this guy could be the next prime minister in a matter of weeks. And you're right, like just the arrogance.
He slides into, do you see him slide into that luxury Audi at the end? Like he just slithers.
And I think it's important for us to point out to people, because especially for folks that are maybe not political junkies that are watching this stuff regularly, like you and I and others, this is not normal.
Nope.
This is not how normal processes for choosing the leader of parties and certainly choosing prime minister goes, where you have an unelected guy that comes in, is not talking to the media, is not taking questions, is not talking to really anybody other than political insiders, and then is saying, don't worry about policies. I'll let you know when I'm good and ready to let you know what I'm.
I might not even tell you.
This is not normal. And we can't, and we really got to call that out. We should not accept this. Canadians ought to reject this type of politics from the Liberals, because it's crazy. This is what are we doing here? We are in the midst of all kinds of national crisis here right now, and they are running around like it's some sort of game, and the smirks and the smiles and the don't worry about it. This is not normal. This is
No.
this is so far from normal. Canadians need to recognize that this is not how this is supposed
Well,
to go.
especially since he's not elected. He's never
Right.
knocked a door in his life, never probably talked to a normal person about, for example, things like, oh, let's say not being able to eat right now. And worse, he has been the chair or in senior leadership positions for some of the biggest multinational corporations in the world, the head of failed policy ideas like this net zero alliance that all these banks have now pulled out of. But the point I'm trying to make is, like, he has definitely been making policy decisions based on compensation in the past.
Yes.
Of course he is.
Yeah.
That was his role. And so we don't know, what his compensation structure or package or anything looks like with these companies now. We're just supposed to take 5 seconds at a press conference and his word for it. And there's so many unanswered questions, but he has been sending out proxies.
Mm-hmm.
So so at the end of that clip, the CBC reporter asked him a very pertinent question, which is, what's your plan for the carbon tax?
Right.
So earlier in the week, he had he's been having all of these Trudeau ministers endorse him. Let's park that. And I want to talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
But he had Stephen Guilbeault, the environment minister, literally a religious zealot on the carbon tax. He was the guy who said he would resign if Trudeau eliminated the carbon tax. He's called for the carbon tax to be increased. And Mark Carney sent him out this week. And in an interview, he said, no, the carbon tax wouldn't be scrapped. Then he had a senior campaign advisor. Mark Carney had a senior campaign advisor tweet in response to this criticism that he hasn't been talking about any policies and say, oh, well, Mark Carney's written some books.
Yeah,
you should read his books. And then in those books is what? Surprise, surprise, this unending adulation for the carbon tax.
Mm-hmm.
But I have some tea. So I am hearing today, we are recording this on Thursday. I am hearing that he is going to walk out or have somebody walk out and say something like he is going to pause the carbon tax. And I just think that is such, I don't want to set off the censors, but it's such bull hockey like that. Like, would you believe Mark Carney is going to scrap the carbon tax if you said that? And why?
No. Why?
Hilarious.
No, it's crazy. No, of course not. And I'll tell you why. Why I don't believe it, why nobody should believe it. And it's what he said right at the end of that clip too. He said, oh, I've got all these. Yeah, I seem to be the choice of a lot of Liberal MPs and ministers. And that is very telling. It's super revealing as to why you shouldn't believe this, because these Liberal MPs and these ministers, some of which who are running to be the leader themselves, have been for years ignoring what Canadians, ignoring what businesses, ignoring what farmers, ignoring what hundreds of thousands, millions of Canadians across the country have been saying to scrap the carbon tax. They have ignored it. Not only that, they have increased it. They have voted for it. They have defended it at every turn. And now, at the 11th hour, when we are on the verge of a national election, and it is, according to polls and experts saying that Canadians are done with the carbon tax and done with the Liberals, you see them flip-flopping and backpedaling and tripping over themselves to run away from this policy. But the problem is that their actions speak louder than their words do on this, and they should not be believed. They are lying about this.
I think what's going to happen, this is my conjecture on what's going to happen. So I think he's going to win because, and like, again, let's park this and go into it for a second. It's clear that the party is making way for him. I will put it that way.
Seems like it, yeah.
I think that he is either going to say something to the effect of, I'm going to implement this after the next election. Like, don't worry, after the next election, we'll do something different on the carbon tax. And then just like Justin Trudeau, right, who he's basically a change of hood ornament for Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
Do you remember, I think it was 2015 when Justin Trudeau promised like middle-class tax cuts or something? Well, we sure didn't see those, right? So I just think that it's going to be utter bull crap. He's going to say a lot of things, but you have to, if he does this, people have to understand that this is somebody who has made their entire career off of the carbon tax. Mark Carney has been the global archpriest architect of the carbon tax. He said that companies that don't support this type of economic instrument should be punished. He has never interacted with normal people, and I honestly think can't wrap his head around the fact that inflation is related to the carbon tax, right? That people are not making ends meet in Canada. So I just think it's total crap, but it's something that we need to watch out for the next couple of days, and then hold him and the Liberals to their record on this, right? And last part of this rant, the carbon tax is set to go up on April the 1st, and Parliament is prorogued. So for everybody who's listening to this, right now, your carbon tax bills will be higher by a substantive amount on April the 1st, thanks to all the people who is endorsing him. Now let's talk about that. Let's talk about Justin Trudeau. I mean, Mark Carney. I mean, Justin Trudeau's team.
So who do you want to start with here? The
point I'm trying to make is that the entirety of Justin Trudeau's cabinet has now endorsed him for the most part.
Yeah,
all the senior people, right?
Yeah, which
Mark Miller.
Yes,
he's got the whole groomsmen set, right?
Yes.
All of.
Yep. Well, and it to your point, like he's got multiple cabinet ministers that have come out, and like these aren't just like endorsements. These are full-throated, like this guy is going to be our savior types of endorsements. And the reality is not only has this guy been on the inside with the Liberal Party, he has been an official, like this was an announcement from Trudeau and the Liberal government earlier last year, which was that he was going to be an economic advisor to their party. And then you have all these ministers that have sat around the cabinet table now endorsing him. And the question that Canadians have to ask themselves is if they are saying things like we want to get rid of the carbon tax or whatever, these were the people that were in the position to do it. Why didn't you do it for the last 10 years?
Well, exactly. And he's got all these senior Liberal cabinet ministers who were the architects of these failed policies that, were seal clappers for Justin Trudeau's terrible policies. And then you have people like Jerry Butts, who was the principal secretary to Justin Trudeau. Brian Lilley had reported that Katie Telford, who is the current principal secretary or chief of staff, I don't know, whatever, she's Justin Trudeau's 2IC, has been making calls for Mark Carney. We heard that, I think it was in that same Brian Lilley article, that Tom Pitfield, the Liberals senior pollster and strategist, he was working on Team Carney, but then took a step back or something. So the point I'm trying to make is that it is Team Trudeau. It is. And, just going to your comment there about the continuity component of this, I think it's hilarious that Carney went out he did a soft launch of his campaign on American TV, said he was an outsider, and now they've completely garbled that message. So even looking at this from a political strategy perspective, the arrogance of the fact that they think that it is that the people are so dumb that they can say, oh yeah, he's an outsider, and then import the entirety of Team Trudeau. I mean, how dumb do they think Canadians are?
I think that's the only explanation that makes any sense, is that they think people are stupid, and Canadians are not. They see through this. They see it a mile away, and they understand that when these ministers and these MPs are saying, "Oh no, don't look at our record. That doesn't represent anything to do with us anymore." People understand that's garbage, and I think there was no better example of that than you've got one of the former ministers, Karina Gould, who is running as a leadership candidate, and she has what I would call interesting message, interesting kind of.
This is wild. Yes, you have a
on
clip of this.
I've got a couple clips. Let me show you, and then we can unpack this here with what she is talking about.
You've been saying Canadians have lost trust in the Liberal Party. So who in your party broke that trust and how?
Well, I actually think that that was collective on all of us, in the sense that Canadians have been telling us for a number of years what the issues are that matter to them, and it took us too long to respond. And I think that what Canadians are looking for is leadership that is listening to them, that is focused on the issues that matter to them, like affordability, like housing, like the cost of groceries, and making policy decisions that reflect that.
Girl, the call is coming from inside the house.
Okay. I have one more clip. Let me show you this other one.
Okay.
I think we have to be honest about the fact that Canadians have lost trust in our party. It took us too long to understand that Canadians were struggling to make ends meet. And
she was in charge, so she's coming out now and
Yes.
saying that there was something wrong, and she knew there was something wrong, but did nothing about it, but vote for her.
It's a crazy take as a leadership candidate to be coming out and saying, yep, we have lost trust of Canadians, we screwed up. And then she goes on to basically provide a list of their record, which includes cost of living is out of control, housing is out of control, we have all these problems, and and how she more or less says is, we took too long to respond to the concerns of Canadians. And Canadians ought to be skeptical, highly skeptical, of politicians, regardless of who they are, that on the eve of an election begin to run away from their record, because it is purely for political gain. It has nothing to do with policy. It has nothing to do with them recognizing that all of this policy that they have has put incredible financial burden on people. They are concerned about their political fortunes. And it is crazy, because you were in charge. All of these things that you are talking about, you had the ability to do for the last 10 years, and you didn't do it. And so then they're saying, yes, well, we need a government that responds to the concerns of Canadians. I agree, Karina. I 100% agree, but it's not a Liberal government. It's a Conservative government led by Pierre Poilievre, because he has been talking consistently about getting rid of the carbon tax,
Yes.
Fixing the housing affordability issue, bringing down the cost, bringing down the cost of groceries and food consistently. So yeah,
that's what struck me, actually, more than anything, was she comes in and says, again, to reemphasize, she says, well, yeah, we were getting it wrong. I knew we were getting it wrong. I was silent. And she stops there. She's got nothing. She doesn't say, and so I am going to do insert policy here, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't contribute to inflation by blah, blah, blah. Like, she's got nothing. So, this is the theme, right? It's her and Carney, and I think we'll leave Freeland to next week. But anytime any of the candidates have been out, they've got nothing on policy. Absolutely nothing. And to your point, that puts them in a really vulnerable situation. I mean, and that makes me happy. But because the Conservatives, we've been coming out and talking about concrete policy measures, like, removing the GST on new home builds to build housing, and a whole litany of other things. But I think also their lack of forward vision and the fact that they've got nothing is coming together. We're now going back to that first clip of Mark Carney being chased by a reporter and saying, oh no, I don't have any policies right now. They are, to your point, being held to their record, and it's not going well. So there's one incident I wanted to talk about on this, where a Liberal minister was being held to account by the deputy leader of the Conservative Party. Now, you have to understand that Parliament is prorogued right now, and that means it's suspended. Justin Trudeau suspended Parliament specifically so that people like me, like the deputy leader of the party, Melissa Lanceman, that we couldn't be in the House of Commons holding them to account on their record. They tried to silence us. So what we've been trying to do is find them where they are and hold press conferences, communicate on forums like this. And so Melissa Lantsman was out in Toronto holding a press conference close to one of these events where Mark Carney was, basically calling the Liberals out on their record on drug addiction, on failing to prevent the opioid crisis, on making it worse. And she was calling out this one minister, and his response was unhinged. It was completely unbecoming, and I think you've got a clip of it.
Daniel Erskine Smith, the housing minister himself, who interrupted Lantsman. Just take a look.
I think that Canadians deserve answers. I think Canadians.
Welcome you to BCC store.
Thank you. I want to know what you promised Mark Carney.
I want to buy you a drink.
Perfect. We want to know what Mark Carney promised Mr. Erskine Smith for his endorsement today. So I hope that you asked him. I hope that you ask him these questions. I hope that you get the answers today.
I'm telling you,
I'll take
nothing.
your questions.
I'm telling you, he promised me nothing.
Just unhinged. So listen, if he was going to heckle her, that's classless. And honestly, for somebody who he's tried to make this brand for himself of asking for civility in the House of Commons and whatnot. But he's heckling her. Okay, Melissa's tough. She can handle a heckle. But for those who didn't see the video, he touches her, not like multiple times. So he comes into her personal space and she tries to kind of push him back by shaking his hand. And then he puts his hand on her again. And then she kind of like signals this is unwanted touching. Do not come into my space. And then he comes in again, touches her like all over her shoulder and says, I'd like to buy you a drink. And this is in front of cameras.
Yeah.
And this is, this was the Liberal response to being held to their record. And just major ick and disgusting. Just no.
Yeah, it was super uncomfortable to watch. And for context for this clip even further is these two are work colleagues. They are co-workers in Parliament. Yes, they have different roles and different functions. But if that type of interaction wouldn't be okay in a boardroom or in another type of workspace where somebody is coming up and touching somebody that's giving a presentation or talking in front of a crowd like that, then what makes it okay in this context at all? It was super uncomfortable. And I was curious your take on this, because you've been around now for a little while and you have seen these type of interactions perhaps before, and you've been in these situations where you're giving a press conference or a media scrum. And so, yeah, I was really curious your take on it as a legislator, having lived through this type of an interaction before.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm tough. I can handle myself, but that doesn't mean anybody should be subjected to that. And I expected that he was going to apologize to her. That's what I kind of expected. Especially from somebody who has, raised the issue of civility many times. I thought he was just going to apologize to her and be done with it. But the opposite happened. So one of the PMO senior staffers was out retweeting just these vile memes, essentially saying like this was okay, this was fine, that this is perfectly normal behavior, and that we should expect it. And I guess for me, I have, between the two of us, how many interviews do I get requests on being a woman in politics and stuff? Like once a week, right? We get something in the inbox.
Yeah.
And here is an example where the media were standing. They could have asked him why he did that and if he was going to apologize. Nobody called it out. Nobody reported on it later in the week as being inappropriate. In fact, a bunch of journalists who I thought would be like, okay, heckling is one thing, but putting hands on someone repeatedly is another. Especially when it was very clear she didn't want that attention.
Yeah.
I thought that they would have, it was a really disappointing situation for me. So for anybody, any of these reporters who want an interview with me about, women in politics, go back and look at that interaction and ask why you didn't report on it being inappropriate, or why you didn't do a piece on asking him for an apology. And I can't sometimes, but kudos to her. Melissa's tough, and kudos to her for pushing through at the press conference in spite of that. And that's what we're going to have to do. Just keep on these Liberals while Parliament is prorogued. But our party leader, Pierre Poilievre, was out this week doing just that. He was talking about very concrete policy in a couple of areas that I wanted to highlight that really were underreported this week. And the first was tariffs. So we talked a little bit last week about how Mr. Poilievre had called upon the Liberals to restart Parliament to address particularly border security measures that the Americans had mentioned as one of the irritants listed with regard to their tariff threat. This week, he was out and he did this is Pierre Poilievre, he did a very substantive interview with CTV Atlantic News on what his exact precise plan was going to be in the eventuality that the Americans impose these tariffs. And it's worth having a listen.
President Trump is a deal maker. He wants to win, but we're both going to lose as Americans and Canadians if we get into a trade war. So what I would say is, how do we position the decision for him so that he understands that America can only win if it allows open, unbridled free trade with Canada? So I would retaliate, and I would target products and services that A, we don't need, B, we can make ourselves, and C, that we can buy elsewhere so that we maximize impact on the Americans while minimizing impact on Canadians. Secondly, I would to pass an emergency, bring it home tax cut on work, investment, making stuff in Canada, energy, home building, so that we can stimulate more economic growth here. 3, we need to become more self-sufficient. That means knocking down barriers, more interprovincial free trade. We have freer trade with the Americans today than we do with ourselves. We have to knock down those barriers, build pipelines, LNG liquefaction facilities to sell our stuff to the world without having to go through the Americans. If they're going to be an unreliable trade partner, we've got to find ways to sell more to ourselves and more to the rest of the world.
Do you see it as a dollar-for-dollar retaliation?
I would say so, yeah. It has to hit hard. And again, we have to be very pinpoint and surgical to make sure we're maximizing impact on the American side while minimizing impact on our side.
So that's a very concrete plan. And I think fairly pragmatic. He talks about the core principle making sure that Canadians aren't taking the brunt of any retaliatory tariffs by ensuring that we're focusing on products that we can make ourselves or buy elsewhere. That's smart. The second thing was looking at strategic tax cuts to spur investment and growth, dealing with interprovincial trade issues, which we know are already a drag on the Canadian economy and the Liberal government has done nothing about. Mm-hmm. And, other just very concrete measures that are actionable, precise. Wouldn't it be great to have Parliament to talk about that? But the contrast to that, Sean, I thought it was the Liberals started off the week with this very swish, expensive, showy retreat at the Chateau Montebello with this trade council that is comprised of people Liberals have appointed, that Justin Trudeau appointed. These are people who have connections into Liberal circles, or they have, very precise business interests, or both, but they certainly don't speak for the average Canadian. That would be an elected representative's job. But even then, they couldn't come up with a cohesive message about what they would do with regard to tariffs. So it was, I think it was refreshing and also, smart for Mr. Poilievre to come out this week while Parliament is prorogued and say, here's a concrete plan.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This is this is a 1.5-minute video that I think every Canadian should take a look at, and they should share it with everyone that they know. You've got Pierre Poilievre outlining a serious plan for a serious challenge, and he looks like a serious leader as he talks about this. And it is, you're right, it's absolutely a stark contrast to what we're seeing come out of Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. You've got Trudeau talking, we talked about this before, he's talking about ketchup and ridiculous ideas that he's throwing
That's
out
right.
here. And you've got
the ketchup mistake.
Yes, and like you said, you've got these unelected individuals that are sort of throwing out ideas and suggestions, and I think most Canadians and businesses are left wondering what is going on. What is the actual
Who's holding
plan?
the pen?
Yeah, this is a serious question and concern that rises above politics and partisanship. But we're left here wondering what the heck the government's response is on this. And as a reminder to this, that, like you said, this would be an excellent thing that we should be talking about in Parliament. This is something that we should be asking ministers about, bringing forward officials in committees and asking serious questions so that we can have a comprehensive plan to respond to this. But yet here we are, Parliament is shuttered, and you have the government thrown into this season of uncertainty because of who? Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh. Justin Trudeau because of his political ego, and Jagmeet Singh because he refuses to do the right thing and force a general election. We could have had a general election in the fall. We could have had a new government in place with a mandate from Canadians, and we could have had Parliament putting forward a serious plan. But instead, we are left flailing around in the wind here and wondering who's in charge and what is their plan. So I think Pierre Poilievre's plan that he outlined there, it was succinct, it was serious, it was very clear, and I think it's something that Canadians can really understand and rally behind. But here we are. Here we are.
And he had another piece of policy that he unveiled this week too. Mm-hmm. So the context for this piece of policy was, the backdrop was commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, where over 1 million of the 6 million Jews that were murdered in the Holocaust met their end in the most brutal, evil way possible. So Mr. Poilievre, he was at commemoration for this. It was on National Holocaust Day. And he addressed the issue of massive increases in anti-Semitism in Canada. And the fact that many Jewish Canadians now, frankly, live in fear in their homes. We've seen huge increase in, frankly, acts of violence, shootings against Jewish schools, arson and firebombing of synagogues, Jewish businesses, protests where we see people calling for the death of Jewish people, death to Canada. And so he didn't have platitudes like the Liberals did on this day. He laid out something that, in a very somber ceremony, he actually got some applause on. And I want people to listen to this.
We see on our own streets anti-Semitism guided by obscene, woke ideologies that have led to an explosion in hate crimes. Hate crimes were up over 100% in Canada before October 7th. Now they're up 251%, with Jews being the principal victims of those crimes. We must not just condemn these things, we must take action against them. We must deport from our country any temporary resident that is here on a permit or a visa that is carrying out violence or hate crimes on our soil.
So that seems like a no-brainer to me. If you are in Canada and you are here on a temporary permit and you commit the acts that Mr. Poilievre mentioned, you should not be allowed to stay in Canada because you have violated the terms of your visas. To me, this is not a complicated or controversial subject. But yet, I think, Sean, for the last decade under the Liberals, it has become one where not only do we allowed this to happen, but we celebrate it. And it was interesting because Poilievre outlined this policy this week. And then at the same time, you have Green Party leader, and for those of you who are listening from other places around the world, the Green Party in Canada is a very far left party. The leader of the Green Party of Canada comes out and tweets about stopping the deportation of a 24-year-old Pakistani national who was arrested multiple times in Canada and had violated the terms of his visa. And you've got the tweet up here. She's venerating this action, right? And I don't, how did we get to this point? How did we get to this point where we're like, the left has normalized that if you come to Canada and you violate the terms of your visa, particularly in the instances that Mr. Poilievre talked about, hate crimes, violence, that it's somehow okay to stay here.
Yeah, that question of how did we get here, that's, I mean, I lay this firmly at the feet of Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party. They have 4 years sown division between Canadians. They have shut down discussion and debate on, like you said, what should be fairly common sense measures, what should be fairly unifying measures, and instead have demonized and tried to silence and censor people on this. And so I lay the blame there. What stuck out for me watching that clip of Pierre was just how prime ministerial he looked. This looked like a man who was ready to become prime minister. He looked like a leader. He speaks like a leader.
He wasn't slipping into an Audi after a cocktail party saying he didn't have to give Canadians any policy.
Exactly. He is laying out clear,
like Mark Carney did,
concise policies that Canadians can get behind in a way that just elevates conversation and policy discussion. And so that was the thing that struck out to me the most, is this bit of this clip and that speech. He looked like he's a prime minister and waiting, ready to take the reins.
I also think he was capturing the public's mood. So we talk about how do we get here, but and I know that there's people, even though we're obviously conservatives, there are people of different political stripe who will listen to this podcast, and I honestly think that this sentiment of respect for the rule of law in Canada is becoming this like groundswell cry across political stripe. But the people that are in charge that are in the political left, like Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney, Elizabeth May, Jagmeet Singh, and their followers, like their caucus, they're not understanding that the lived reality of having catch and release bail policies, not enforcing Canadian immigration law, that is having a material impact on the lives of Canadians who do not feel safe.
Yes.
And who feel like the immigration system is broken because it is not being valued.
Right.
And so for me, yes, I think Pierre looked like a prime minister there. He also was reading the room and saying something that's fairly common sense. So the fact that on one hand this week you had Mr. Poilievre saying that, on the other hand, you had Elizabeth May out there advocating for somebody to stay in Canada after clearly violating the terms of their visa. It just, like, the left does not understand it. So
they have missed the plot.
They have missed the plot. So we've got a few more minutes, and there's 3 more issues I want to quickly talk about.
Okay.
The first 2 are political stories, one is a political story. Another is a really serious issue that have hit the news that didn't quite get the attention I think they needed. The first was that early in the week, there were reports that Justin Trudeau, even though he's a lame duck prime minister, he will not be prime minister in a few weeks, even though his successor will be chosen by Liberal insiders and likely not hold elected office. he is planning to stack the Senate with Liberal appointees. And Sean, I even heard a wild rumor, and I have to say, you know, I'll caveat that this is just gossip. I don't have any substantive proof, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was true, that he was going to appoint people like Katie Telford, his chief of staff, like pernicious Liberals, to the Senate in order to essentially block any future government. Because the Senate, for people who might not know, in Canada, you have an elected chamber, the House of Commons, that's where members of Parliament like me are. And then you have the Senate, which is all appointed by the Liberals. But in order for legislation to pass, like, let's say legislation to repeal the carbon tax or other things that the Liberals they love so much, it has to pass both chambers. And for Trudeau to stack the Senate as a lame duck, I just think is even more of an abrogation of democracy than some of the other things they've pulled recently, like proroguing Parliament. But I know you had thoughts on this too.
Yeah, well, and just for people that maybe are not familiar, like with the term "lame duck" prime minister, like really, what has happened and what is normal in a case like this is when a prime minister like Justin Trudeau has done announces his intention to resign, the prime minister and the government tends to enter what's sort of just a caretaker mode, which is they are ensuring that the function of government continues, but they are not really putting forward any type of policies or making any decisions that are going to have long-term effects beyond the extent of their mandate. And right now, Justin Trudeau's mandate expires on March the 9th, when the next prime minister is chosen because of the Liberal leadership vote. In this decision that is being reported to stack the Senate with a bunch of Liberal appointees, he is putting potentially his stamp on not only the next few weeks, but the next however long. Senators are appointed to the age of 75. And so to your point, like this is a lame duck of a prime minister who really shouldn't be implementing decisions that go beyond his mandate, potentially putting one in place that could go for years and years to come.
And yet, so this kind of brings me into one of the other things that is just starting to be talked about, but maybe not in detail. You've got Jagmeet Singh, who supposedly, I thought he didn't like the Senate. He's now flip-flopping and saying that he's going to prop the Liberals up. He sent signals out yesterday that when Parliament returns at the end of March, that he would continue to prop the Liberals up in spite of all of this. And you and I have gone back on this, because you and I had a kind of a spicy conversation where I was like, no, I'm not sure that we're going to have an election in the spring. You were like, well, you know, he said this. You didn't push back too much, but now seeing this, do you think that we're going to have an election this spring? I think that, I don't know. I think he's going to support the Liberals no matter what. I hope to be proven otherwise, but
yeah, I mean, there's certainly more evidence being submitted to show that you're right, that your suggestion on this is right, that we may not have an election this spring. And for those that don't remember, it was Jagmeet Singh in the fall who said, oh, I'm tearing up the supply agreement with the Liberals. I'm not going to support them anymore. And then turned around almost immediately and supported the Liberals and propped them up, and is now saying, well, you know, I'm not going to support them. I'm going to bring them down. But now, to your point, is bringing out some signals that shows that he might. And so I guess the bottom line is that this is neither Jagmeet Singh, Justin Trudeau, or any of these Liberal leader contenders should be believed. They have lied repeatedly over and over to Canadians. And so it really does leave you in this position of, I don't know what to think. I think he'll prop them up without asking for anything.
I did write a long piece about this week on the Substack.
Yeah.
So please read that if you haven't. But I just think he's got too many other motivations, personal motivations with regard to salary, pension, whatnot, where I don't think the Liberals have to offer him anything. I think that they're just tripping over themselves to prop this guy up. And so you've got Trudeau potentially about to stack the Senate, you know, and the NDP and be like, oh, we don't like the Senate and blah, blah, blah. But, oh, yeah, we might support these guys again. That's
well, if people are listening and if they live in a riding where their member of parliament is an NDP member, they ought to be phoning and emailing their member of parliament and telling the NDP to bring this government down, to not support this government anymore, and go to a general election so that we can actually have a decision that Canadians get to weigh in on.
Because there's some pretty serious issues facing the country right now. And something I wanted to highlight that people might not have seen was that the city of Toronto declared a food insecurity emergency this week. And the news article that I am reading, it says this: amid a historic hunger crisis in which more than 1 in 10 Torontonians rely on food banks, Mayor Olivia Chow has declared a food insecurity emergency in Toronto. So we've got Justin Trudeau focused on stacking the Senate. We have the likely next Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, avoiding reporter questions coming out of a cocktail party while he slips into an Audi. You have Jagmeet Singh likely to support these people. And we have one of Canada's top cities declaring a food emergency because people can't afford to eat. And Parliament is shuttered. So...
and we're being told this is all normal. There's nothing to see here.
Yep.
Like, it's crazy.
It's fine.
Yeah.
You know,
it's crazy.
So there's what I wanted to close on was we have been talking a lot about the impacts of Liberal incompetence, Parliament being shuttered, the lack of democracy on short-term issues. So the food insecurity emergency, I'm not saying that's a short-term issue. I'm saying it's a fire that is on the doorstep of tens of millions of Canadians right now. People can't afford to eat. So obviously a government has to be seized with that. We need a new government to do that. There's also longer term issues that nobody is paying attention to in the country right now because the Liberals can't even manage the dumpster fire issues that they've created right now, right?
Yeah.
And one of those issues is it bubbled up early in the week in the US. It had a big impact on some of the US stock markets. And that was a artificial intelligence product that came out of China called Deepseek. So, you know, this is not an AI podcast or a tech podcast, but for people who aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, it's essentially, this product is essentially a rival to OpenAI's ChatGPT. And there's a lot of people who are listening. You've probably used ChatGPT already. The thing is that a lot of American investors and innovators have convinced the world that the US has the global lead in artificial intelligence development. And they've established a narrative about what that cost is, what type of training and skills are needed to blow that delta on leadership wide open, energy needs. And then this product from China, Deepseek, comes in. Apparently it was reported it was developed for $6 million compared to these billions of dollars into these other technologies. Now there's this whole discussion about intellectual property. And I could talk for 4 hours about how the federal Liberal government has not thought about Canada's place in this discussion and what that means for Canadian workers, consumers, even data rights. The point I'm trying to make here is you have this big disruptive story in the US that made national news about the impact on the American economy. And it wasn't even a blip in Canada because the Liberals, they can't manage the dumpster fires that they have right now. So like I am worried not just about the immediate fires that Canadians are trying to manage, but the fact that these guys aren't paying attention to things that will have a long-term impact on the Canadian economy, and they are nowhere on this.
Yeah, it's super concerning when you are seeing the rest of the world responding to emerging issues like this, and like you said, we're not even in the room because the day-to-day is so dysfunctional. at every level. And I'm glad you brought this up. You've been talking about this issue for a long time. I think you're the first legislator to actually bring up the topic of ChatGPT and actually present it in Parliament. And you've been talking about this for a while because it's an important issue. It's one that impacts a lot of Canadians, like you said. And I'm not sure there's probably a lot of people that aren't paying attention to this issue. And I know we're just about out of time, but like if you were to say to Canadians that maybe don't follow the tech space and the AI, like the 30-second, like why this matters, why they need to give this a look and understand, what's your explanation on that to people?
If you had asked me this question in, let's say, the mid 70s, not that I was born yet, by the way, but if you had asked me that question about the emergence of personal computers and why should we care about these machines? I don't know. Why would I need that to do anything? Why should I care? In hindsight, looking back, you know why. It's because, personal computing revolutionized the economy. It ushered in an entire new mode of economic production. And I think the jury might be out a little bit today on how much these artificial intelligence products are going to change the economy over the next 10 years. But it's clear that they already are.
Sure.
People are using ChatGPT in a variety of different ways that it's very clear there's going to be disruption on existing businesses, but there's also going to be new jobs created in fields that we just don't know about yet. But why it matters is that we're, like you said, we're not in the room on conversations about this right now. The Liberals have created an economic environment in Canada where first of all, this is a technology that requires a lot of energy from data centers.
Right.
Their policy is to not develop our energy resources. We have uncompetitive tax policies like the carbon tax compared to other jurisdictions, which make it less attractive for people to want to move to Canada and invest in Canada. And even issues like crime and the high cost of living, those are determinants to growth. So when you look at all of those things, and the Liberals aren't answering these questions, or we're not even in the room to talk about this. How are we going to have a conversation about this in trade agreements where all of a sudden data becomes part of it? So I just want to underscore, without getting into the nuances of the technology itself and whatnot, that this is the type of long-term policy that the Liberals are nowhere on. They're not thinking about, they have no strategy about how to manage the economy. Not that I want the Liberals to touch anything with the economy anymore, but there are a lot of ways where the government should be getting out of the way to allow for innovation, or even talking about like consumer protections, right?
Right. Yeah.
But clearly there's a dumpster fire that needs to be cleaned up first.
Yeah, to put it mildly.
Yeah. Well,
on that happy note,
I do appreciate, to those of you who have made it this far and listened, we are going to be coming to you with these updates on things that we're hearing behind the scenes as Parliament is prorogued. So if you haven't already, please click subscribe and auto download this podcast so you don't miss any of our updates. We will be coming to you. And for those of you who have subscribed on Substack, thank you so much. Please share this email that you received this in with your friends if you enjoyed it. And if you're listening to this on YouTube and you're a new listener, click subscribe to our channel. Working hard for you. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. If you want even more political news, subscribe at michellerempelgarner.substack.com. And if you like what you hear, be sure to share this podcast.